Here's Jen. Great. All right. Figures here. Good. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. It looks like we have a full house today, so thank you all. And I think we're here for a continuation of the discussion about the Resiliency Fund. And Jen, I know you, we had a conversation last week about that and where we thought we were heading. And if you'd like to take it from here, I think you've got it. You've got a good plan.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
At least
yes,
a good starting
absolutely.
point. Yeah, thank you.
Good starting point for discussion, for sure. Just one quick question. The only member I don't see is Joe. Does anybody know if he's joining us today?
I didn't hear from him.
Yeah, I didn't either. So, okay, hopefully he's just coming soon. All right, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen. And hold on one second. Make sure we're on the right spot.
We do not have Anne Marie today. She's out suffering with allergies, but Janelle is here.
Great. Sorry to hear that. It is that time of year, though. For
yes,
sure.
it is. Yeah.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So we just wanted to start it out. I know Jim was not with us at the last meeting. Joe was not as well. We wanted to start out just, picking up exactly where we left off. Like the mayor said, I sent you kind of the slides that we tweaked a little bit after last month's discussion, which was the March 22nd meeting. And I'm just going to walk through that. As usual, the planning team has met and talked about it and has some comments for the committee as well as some suggestions. And, the idea is to kind of focus on those few remaining sticking points to get to an overall recommendation. And I know at this point, in the process, I may risk sounding like a broken record, but we are looking for a broad-based recommendation to go to council. They will go through a pretty broad public engagement with the committee, with the public and council, and so we want to kind of keep it broader because we know going through the process it will be narrowed down and kind of chipped away at, and and that's just, generally where we're going. So I'm going to start with this slide and, just primarily for Jim's sake, because he wasn't here at the last meeting, there had been in the early March meeting a lot of discussion in terms of an emergency fund and having the city consider that. And so we took this suggestion and talked about it at last month's meeting. It is important to note that by recommending council explore and establish this policy, that we are not necessarily recommending that there be an additional tax or fee or anything placed on residents at this point in time. Anne Marie made a great point at the March 22nd meeting about it perhaps being a policy that council puts in place that says there's a minimum amount of reserves that need to be maintained in case of a storm emergency and to be able to address that. And so I think at the end of that meeting, we pretty much had not a formal vote on it, but we pretty much had an informal agreement by most of the committee members to make this a part of the overall recommendation. Phil, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, just for Jim's sake, and again, the context behind this, right, is because originally our resiliency fund, there was discussion about whether or not some of it should be used for emergency relief, and a portion of it should be used for the more proactive stuff. And the discussion at the last meeting was to separate out the storm recovery efforts and recommend to council and the city that they establish a separate storm recovery fund so that this committee could focus on a resiliency fund that engages with those more proactive measures. So that's what's the recommendation here. This is not the resiliency fund. This is separating out a storm recovery element of the resiliency fund that we'll discuss throughout this meeting.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. And in that case, we're not going any deeper into that. This is the level of recommendation for that emergency fund to go on its own path. And so, jumping into the resiliency fund specifically, the first couple of bullet points have not changed since these were first proposed probably 6 weeks ago. And it hasn't provided a whole lot of discussion. It's the third bullet point that we spent a bit of time talking about at last month's meeting. And I think it was actually one of the committee members had proposed, kind of holding on to the funds for a certain amount of time before they can be used, and then allowing a minimum or maximum amount of them to be used every year. There is concern from the planning team that, year 10, we have, 2.5 million, you use 50% of it that year, and we're at 1.25 million, 50% of that the next year. We are still dwindling away and chipping away at a fund, granted for mitigation purposes and for resiliency purposes, but we just want the committee to kind of think that through a little bit in terms of whether this is something that they want to keep there, or if there is some change to that bullet. I am going to walk through all three slides first, and then we can go back and talk about, what specific points you want to do. So next slide. Again, we did talk about these at last month's meeting. There was some discussion about whether bulk property buyouts were an appropriate thing to list on this. And again, the project team met and kind of talked about it and decided that, from our perspective, these are something that could be left on this list safely, and that, at a time in the future when council and other officials are in the position to make these decisions, that we allow them to make the decisions. And again, this will go through that public process in council, and we feel that these things will be narrowed down as part of that process, and we'd like to keep it broader at this point. But it is the committee's recommendation, and so, we do want to, hear your input on that again. 2 and 3, I don't think changed. And then for slide 4, this goes into those potential sources of revenue. And so you might remember that where we started out were the city collected resiliency fund, but also encouraging BPW to do its own fund. We decided, which it does have, we decided that, again, as part of this discussion, that because these recommendations are going to the city specifically, that we should focus on what the city can do. And through the discussion, the committee seemed to settle on having a flat fee per property for the residential properties and a non-residential fee that was based on square footage of impervious surface. And this is, of course, impervious surface on the ground, not square footage of the building, which, of course, makes sense when you think about leveraging that impervious surface for stormwater purposes. And so this would be one of the considerations for how to fund the resiliency fund, how to create revenue for it. Accommodations fees, property tax increase, building permit fees, developer impact fees. Obviously, the last two, we feel, because of the amount of development that really does occur in Lewis, these would be fairly low revenue generators for the fund, and so we don't feel that they would really get us where we want to go. But again, in terms of a recommendation, these would be, these are where we landed in terms of having that choice, and we think it's a good broad choice. We did take off the transfer fee, again, because the idea of just reallocating funds that were already going to another project into other areas of the city's operations wasn't a good idea to reallocate those to the specific fund. So with that, let me go back. Yep, I took care of that one. So let me go back to this slide and open it up for discussion of the committee and see how, after some thought, how everybody's feeling about kind of these three items. Are there any specific comments or questions? Or do we like where it is right now in terms of a recommendation? Give you just a second to think about it. Jim, go ahead.
Sure. Sorry, I'm in the car today. But yeah, I thought the one item under individual property buyouts, I was able to listen to the previous meeting's discussion.
Okay.
And I thought that there was some discussion about that item being taken off. Like, I do understand the intent of why that is in there, but I also understood from some of the comments made from some of the other panelists that we didn't necessarily want to strap ourselves to that line and that item, because there might be I'll call it a less traditional opportunity for the city to do a property buyout, but not in the traditional property buyout sense. So anyway, I just wanted to see where we were on that one.
Sure. I mean, as you may recall, there were definitely some comments that wanted to take it out. I think there were also a couple of comments that wanted to keep it in. And so it wasn't really decided, straight out. I don't know, Jim, if you want to share where you would fall on that particular issue.
So I would fall under taking it out and not having that restriction, and just maybe a potential example. I mean, I do think the traditional sense, and Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of a property buyout is if a property is flooded and there's damage to the actual property itself on multiple occasions, and it's gone through multiple flood cycles with multiple damages. FEMA provides some sort of funding to help buy the property, and
Yeah, that's correct. So they call it repetitive loss. So if there is a property that experiences repetitive loss, FEMA does have programs where the property owner can get bought out. Those programs require a 50% match. So FEMA will provide 50% of the property value, fair market value. The other 50% needs to be coming from some other source. And the restriction, once the property is bought out, is that the property is demolished and remains open space. So I know that I can give you an example here in Delaware. There was a property in Bowers Beach, repetitive loss. It ended up getting bought out. I don't know where they got the extra 50% from, but it ended up getting bought out, and it's now a bocce ball court that's owned by the city.
So having that restriction in there, I guess I'm confused as to why. Like, I do understand the equity issue, but if there's an opportunity for the city to create an open space, I guess, area that is in such a susceptible flooding area, why would we want to restrict ourselves from being able to use these funds to create that space? Because isn't just and it could be, a potential project would be like almost like a stormwater park, just to say the least, or some sort of creative manner to help minimize flooding in the area that we're talking about. So that's why I'm just I feel like the actual, like the super, and I think Tom had mentioned this, I feel like it's somewhat covered by the super majority of the council to be able to assess whether it's a project or a project that is, using funds in a non-equitable way or a very, effective project to help mitigate sea level rise.
So Jim, I know you're writing the cards, so you can't see the slides. Actually, where the bulk property buyouts is listed is under potential projects that are intended or could be intended and covered by this Resilience Fund. I don't know if that helps.
Isn't that? But no, it doesn't, because that's bulk property. So the majority of the properties that are located within the floodplain are individual properties.
So the difference.
I do understand the bulk property premise, would be to buy a bulk of individual properties, but I just don't. I don't know. I feel like it just kind of straps the city in utilizing these funds in a manner that that could be creative and beneficial to the town. Because everything is there's some synergy between Parks and Rec and what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to create. Creating additional open space benefits Parks and Rec.
So Jim, Jim, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. Are you saying that you don't think the Resiliency Fund should be used to create open space by purchasing property?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying the exact opposite.
Okay, so then we want to keep the option open for the Resiliency Fund to purchase property. And
right. So I don't think you should say the funds will not be used for individual property buyouts. I just feel like I understand the beach replenishment. I do have a quick question on that, but I just feel like they should take out the individual property buyouts.
So individual property buyouts isn't an option. Yeah. Funds will not be used for beach replenishment. You're saying the funds should be used for individual property buyouts. Okay, I gotcha.
Or it could be. I'm not should be, but could be.
Could be. Gotcha. Okay.
Phil, I think that Jim makes an interesting point that if such a thing were to be utilized, though, you would want that action to be considered by council and to have a supermajority vote on something like that, so that you didn't just do it with a simple majority.
Yeah.
Marta, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
I think I was one of the ones, I know I was one of the ones who did not think it should go for individual property buyouts because, the equity issue that you already mentioned is one thing. It's less incentive for people to do anything about their properties to be resilient. Then the other thing is one property, I don't know what the dimensions, 50 by 100, whatever, is not exactly a lot of open space. Sure, every bit might help, but I would rather see the funds saved for green infrastructure, acquisition of open space, and vulnerability assessments to make the city more resilient, not just that one individual property owner.
So Marta, just to clarify, I know you don't want individual property buyouts listed, which isn't currently, but do you take the same stance with bulk property buyouts still?
No, the bulk property buyouts would be fine because you get a little bit more open space, hopefully, depending on how many properties are in there, and that could be up to the council with their supermajority.
Okay, great. That helps. Thank you. Keena. Mm-hmm.
My question is actually for Phil. When these individual buyouts come up, is that, and there's repetitive loss or repetitive damage, is that an option to the homeowner, or are they required to take that if the city or county demanded it?
No, there's no requirement. Okay. You're the property owner. You do what you want with your property. It's your choice.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Rodney?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question to make sure I understood. What is the difference between a bulk property buyout and an individual property buyout?
So I'll give you an example. The bocce ball court was a singular property in Bowers. There was also a property here in Newcastle County, a larger development that went in a very vulnerable area. Nearly all of the homes in the development experienced repetitive losses, and the state and the county got together to match the FEMA funds to buy out the bulk of the development. So it's multiple homeowners in the same area.
So that's bulk because there's more than one owner.
Yes, and they were adjacent to each other. So I don't think you would want to do sort of spot buyouts versus contiguous area buyouts. I think is maybe a more helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, I understand that. But if you had a piece of property that was undeveloped, but zoned for development, and it had a single owner, and the development could go in and put a dozen or 20 houses on it, but it was adjacent to a wetland or in a marsh, and I'm thinking of one that I'm aware of in town where a lot of local residents around it, neighbors said, you're just going to use it up and there's no place for the floodwaters to go. So it's one owner, it's one large piece of property, and rather than develop it, which they're entitled to do, the city would say, that's more valuable to the community at large to not develop it and allow floodwaters to back up into it.
So that would not be a property buyout. That would be an acquisition of open space.
Okay, and that's different then.
That is different.
Okay.
And there you don't get FEMA money. Yeah.
Right. No, you don't.
You don't get FEMA money for that, and that's again, the argument there would be you wouldn't have to go to that length. That's a planning, zoning review, and all of that as well. So, right, but that would be an acquisition of open space because it's currently open space. You're not buying out already developed.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Jim, your hand is still up. I don't know if it was just still up or if you had additional comments.
I actually had a couple additional questions. So
Great.
I wanted to ask Phil kind of Tina's same question, but in a slightly different way. If a individual property owner was eligible for the property buyout, is the local jurisdiction required to provide the 50% matching?
No.
Okay. So to Marta's, I guess, point, I do feel that if we leave it in there, it just limits the council, it limits the city from a potential good opportunity to provide something, right? To provide some project that would help mitigate flooding. So if the city's not obligated to do it, the homeowner's not obligated to do it, I feel like that supermajority would cover a sound reasoning for doing it or not doing it in order to purchase and utilize the current, and again, like FEMA could change their rules, right? Like the 50% match rule and criteria is what FEMA is today. Who knows what it's going to be 5 years from now if flooding is more prevalent and they want to get more aggressive. So you never know what the future FEMA requirements are. So to think, I just feel like to think that, it might not be worth it for a small lot. That could be true, very true. However, the supermajority vote would help determine that. And if you leave that in there, you don't have that opportunity to have that discussion about whether it makes sense or not make sense, whether it's equitable or non-equitable. I just feel like it just all of a sudden stops your discussion by leaving it in there.
I'll make one additional comment on this conversation that I think is important to point out. Y'all have really high property values down there in Lewis. And 50% of really high property values is going to eat up this fund real quick.
For sure.
Chris?
So I guess, Phil, back to you again, sorry, but the Bowers Beach purchase that happened, I mean, that happened without one of these funds, and it was a one-off, right? I guess we're not, if we keep it out of the Resiliency Fund, we're not saying that the town could never purchase a property. We're just saying that the fund can't be used for that. And I don't know, it just seems a little bit too sticky. And to your point about, depleting the funds, I don't think that it should be in there. I don't think what we're doing here would limit the city from doing it if they were to decide to do it on a one-off basis, but we're just basically saying the Resiliency Fund shouldn't be used for it, and that's where I would come down on it, not for an individual property. Both property okay, but not for individual property.
Okay. How do other committee members feel or fall? Go ahead, Marta, and then I'll give somebody else.
Well, there's a comment from the public as well that goes to this issue that it might be worth reading because it has a lot of the rationale that I would agree with too.
Thank you. We'll have a chance for public comment right now.
Okay,
I
then I'll reiterate. I think it's important not to take away the incentive for people to do something about their own properties. They are there in the flood zone. This does not help the city be resilient. The green infrastructure is really important. If we take it to buy an individual property, take that fund, there's less for green infrastructure. I mean, there'll be plenty of projects that we can spend that money on more wisely, I think. That's all.
Great, thank you. Joe, I saw your hand up for a moment.
Yes. I just agree with Jim. I think that it's going to be a super majority. And so I think it just gives the 4 members of council flexibility if it is in the interest of the fund to do this. And I just do not think we should be limiting it by putting a restriction on it. Hopefully 4 people on council can come to a reasonable decision on this. So I agree with Jim.
Okay, thank you. Phil, you want to add it?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe what we should do is just take a vote on just this one specific.
Right.
Do we want to, because we're back and forth, and we do need to make a decision on this so we can move forward.
Understood. Yeah, absolutely. You want to keep it out separate? Or
I think maybe
Or
keep
do it now.
keep bulk. I think there's 2 things. Keep bulk property buyouts as one of the listed options,
Yep.
and remove individual property buyouts from the excluded options and include it in the list of options. I think there's actually 2 things that need to be decided here.
Okay. So why
Because
don't
it's
we
not
go-
clear. It's not clear one way or the other from this discussion.
Right, absolutely. So why don't I go ahead, I'm going to stop the share, and we'll just ask that individually so that we can get it down and move on. Okay, so of the committee members, in terms of keeping the bulk property buyouts as potential projects covered by the Resiliency Fund, you can raise your hand or nod, whatever, if you're in favor. Raise your hand or
And Kina and Jim, you both have your hands. They were raised as part of the. So I just.
I have a question.
okay, go ahead. All right, so vote on hold for a sec.
Yes, thank you. All right, we are making a recommendation to the city
Right.
Correct,
through this vote.
correct.
But don't they have the option if they want to keep it or not? So in other words,
Absolutely.
what a stronghold is it if this goes forward in whatever manner, I guess is really what I'm asking.
No, we can vote to take both of them out, and the city may put it back in before they vote to finalize the actual provisions of the Resiliency Fund. Absolutely. I mean, all of this
Or
is,
vice versa.
or vice versa, right? I mean, this is just a recommendation from this specific committee.
Right.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to add before the vote is that this committee is coming up with recommendations, and I heard a couple of comments saying, leave it up to the city council. Yes, they will ultimately decide on things, but I think we ought to come up with the most logical recommendation we can for the council to consider.
Absolutely. And Jim, you have your hand up still. Did you have another comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry to make this longer than what it needs to be, but I guess I'm just very confused as to the reasoning or the comment of not incentivizing homeowners to raise their properties, because the city is not obligated to do this. And then so that homeowner may or may not get that buyout. It's really up to it would be, the way that this is laid out, up to the supermajority of the council. And then the second point is, you're right, home prices are extremely high. 50% would be extremely high. That's not to say that this fund would be solely used for all 50%. Maybe this fund is only 10%, and then there's 40% coming from the state. So if Lewis was able to give the 10%. So I think just having these restrictions just really I think it would just restrict potential creative opportunities for some potential great projects.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we vote just on these two specific items? Marta?
Yeah, if we're going to vote it, could we at least look at the other rationale that has been proposed by the audience too, so that people can read it or at least hear it?
Sure. So from the public, we have, it says, I see no justification to compel Lewis citizens to buy out others' property either on an individual or bulk basis. Property owners assume the risk when purchasing the property and should bear the obvious foreseeable loss. This may sound harsh, but it's simply not the community's responsibility to assume this expense. And moreover, since the property to be bought out already is flooded by definition, it would not be of use to the city for flood mitigation, etc. One property won't make a difference and will be virtually no value in flood mitigation for municipal purposes. So that is our comment from the public. Jim.
I'm so sorry. So so to that point, like the counterpoint to that is, if there was a property for sale, say down by the Dairy Queen area that consistently floods, if there's an opportunity to buy that particular piece of parcel and create some sort of stormwater management park right there that would all of a sudden control all of the flooding in that particular area, or at least help minimize that flooding in that area, where you could provide access to the ferry, you could provide access to the state park from Savannah Road. So I understand looking at it through a lens, but if you step back from it further, there's opportunities for it's not necessarily helping the homeowner. You have to view it as, which it could, but you have to view it as help the city provide open space for creative projects that would help flooding in localized areas. So that's really how I'm viewing this.
Okay. Any other committee members? Okay. So again, those in favor of keeping bulk property buyouts as potential projects for the Resiliency Fund, please raise your hand. This is for bulk property buyouts. And so I see everyone, including yours, Jim, with no vote from Khalil. Okay, so that stays in. Okay. Those in favor, and I need to make, those in favor of removing individual property buyouts from the restricted list. So bullet 2. If you are in favor of removing individual property buyouts from the restricted list, please raise your hand. So I have Jim, Candace, Rodney, and I'm writing these down, so please bear with me, Frank, Joe, and Keena.
Nope.
So on those who want to keep it, we have Tom, Marta, and Chris.
I'm sorry, my line dropped out. What was the question on this one?
Do you want to remove individual property buyouts from the
Yes.
restricted list?
Yes.
Okay. So that is, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for removing it, and 3 members for keeping it. And this committee is a 2/3 vote. And so 6 out of 9 meets that 2/3 vote. And so we would be removing it from the recommendation, or from the restricted list, just so I can be clear. Keena.
Can I just say one thing about that? For those that did not concur, my thinking changed about it because I figured it would be better to address it on a case-by-case basis. And Jim, I thought, gave a great example for us to consider.
Thank you for that explanation. Okay, and so let me take that out from bullet number 2. Save that. Okay. Go back to this, share. Okay, so here we are. Funds will be used for beach replenishment, not be used for beach replenishment. Are there any other topics on this slide that anybody has questions or comments or concerns about? Okay. Going back to slide 1, sorry. Just want to make sure that everybody's good with the wording in terms of maintaining funds for a minimum of 10 years before they can be used.
Actually,
and
I'm sorry,
maximum-
Jen, I'm very
Yes.
sorry. Can you return to the previous slide?
Sure.
So we removed it from the second, but it should be added to the first.
Right.
This. There we go.
Right, so individual or bulk property buyouts.
Right.
There we go. Thank you. Great. Okay. So the maintaining 10 years, 50%. Is everybody good with that? Seems so. For another moment. Okay. Which leaves the potential sources of revenue.
And I'm sorry, again, just very nitpicky details on this. I think what we're saying here, and we should specify 10 years from creation of the fund. So it starts the clock when the fund is created.
Right.
That's what, is that how we all understand this, right?
I thought when we discussed this at the last meeting, that we had, I had some concerns that this money was going to sit there for 10 years, and yet if there was a good project that came up, we're very different, like I said, than Coral Gable, because there is technology and infrastructure now. Do we really want to exclude any ability to use this money in the first 10 years?
Yeah, there's not enough there.
Sure. Tom, would you want to reduce the 10 to like 5, or not hold on to it for any specific amount of time?
Well, I go back to, I mean, it takes we're saying it's going to take a super majority of mayor and city council, that they be the ones who judge the cost benefit of using the funds or not. I'm not quite sure what we're gaining by holding on to it for 10 years. I mean, so we have a $5 million pool, but that's saying that we're saving for some specific thing.
Tom, I don't think in 10 years you'd have a $5 million pool.
Well, at $500,000 a year,
You might, yeah. But you would deplete it, as has been said earlier, pretty quickly if you started using it in 10 years.
well, frankly, I think in some of these areas, if we don't do something before 10 years, we're going to have a lot more cost on the city side and BPW for dealing with the flooding issues.
Yep, I don't disagree.
So the 10 years seems artificial to me is my concern.
How do other committee members react to that? Joe?
Yeah, I initially, when I looked at this, I thought 5 years was ample time. And since it was discussed the last time, I just didn't raise my objection since I wasn't there. But I think 10 years is an awful long time. We could have some major events between now and then that may result in a need for these funds. And if a supermajority think that's the case, then I don't think they should be hamstrung for 10 years. That's a long time.
Okay, thank you. Keena?
I'd like to hear some feedback on this. Is there a reason why we can't entrust our council to make the decision if and when it's needed? Yes, we'd like to build the fund, but other than that, because of the situation may occur, that it's really important that they begin using that. I'd like to hear other thoughts.
Okay, I can agree with that. Does anyone have a specific comment to address Keena's? I know, Marta, your hand is up.
Well, I can address Keita's as part of what I was going to address. I think it would be good to be able to use it a little earlier for green infrastructure, not for what I think. I'm not sure, Joe, were you talking about using it for when there's a disaster, an emergency, and doing something for it? I don't think this whole resiliency fund is for that, if that's what you meant. But for a green infrastructure and buying open space, if there's a great opportunity, this, as Tom said, the sooner the better that we get ready for sea level rise that is coming and getting worse. As long as we, and then you leave it to the council to see if it's worth it.
Okay. Good comments. And Joe, if you want to clarify your comment to answer Marta in terms of.
I don't really have anything to add to my comment.
Okay. No. So it was
I don't disagree with Marta.
Great. Okay. Anybody else have a comment on? Is there anyone in the committee who feels that we should keep it at 10 or that we should look? And I can't see. No. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of heads. So.
Yeah, I think my sense is that it's to remove the restriction entirely.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay. Do we want to keep the maximum of 50% of the fund balance that can be used in any 1 year? Does anyone have a strong feeling one way or the other on that? Rodney, go ahead.
Yeah, my feeling is that this is for larger, resiliency fund is for larger projects. It's not for a lot of little ones. If you do it every 5 years, my math says it's 2.5 million, and then you can only spend 50% of that at any one time. You are whittling it down. It becomes a small project fund.
That's right.
And I thought when we originally talked about it, we were trying to make it into a larger fund that we could then use to attract other funds, perhaps, and get a larger, more meaningful project out of it. It means you have to save longer to buy the bigger house.
Right.
So it just, that has meaning for me. I don't think this fund is for, every couple of years spending a little bit of money on one idea after another. It's for something bigger than that because it's about resiliency. And who knows, when a project is going to come along that would make a lot of difference, but we can't afford it because we didn't save the money.
Okay, so you would be in favor of keeping the restriction on the maximum amount?
I think so, one way or the other. I mean, yeah, I think so. I think it makes sense the way it is.
Right. Okay, Joe? Your hand's still up.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, Keena?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Rodney said. I also was thinking that if opportunity would arise where maybe there is some kind of federal incentive that if we match a certain amount that could be applied towards a project that would fall under this, we might want to be able to take care of it. And again, I'll go back to not tying the hands of the decision makers at the time if it's could possibly be appropriate and used wisely.
So where does that fall in terms of removing the restriction for the spending in any 1 year or the minimum amount of years?
Let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, I mean,
how I would apply that, yes.
Sure. Sorry, not to put you on the spot.
That's all right.
I wanted to
Valid.
clarify.
It's a valid point. It's a valid point.
Okay. So Joe, you put your hand back up, and then Chris.
I have my hand, it says lower. Oh, lower.
Oh, there we go. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is, it's a lot of guesswork, the 10-year and the 50% thing. I think what we're trying to do here is just, again, we're just making a recommendation. I think what we're just trying to present to the council is we think that the funds, we should be really careful with the funds, let's put it that way. And we want the fund to grow. We want it to become large so that it does attract other funds and that we can do big things with it. And I think the council will recognize that we are sort of guessing here when we're saying, well, hold it for 10 years and then you can only spend 50% a year. If the council wants to change that, they can.
Absolutely.
But to me, this is more symbolic. Like we're just trying to make the point that we should be really careful with how it's spent, and we should try the best we can to grow this fund as large as we can. Trying to say it's better to hold it for 10 or 5, or should the maximum be 50% or 25%? I think at least for me, if I were to throw a number out there, I'm guessing. So, I think it's okay to leave it the way that it is.
Keena, did you put your hand back up or?
I did, because you made me think about things. I think part of it is the interpretation of what is written here and how it would go forward. I almost think maybe changing some of the wording to emphasize the encouragement is to build a minimum of $500,000 a year, and to encourage to use sparingly, if at all, before meeting 10 years. The goal is to give it a chance to grow a little bit. So if we worded it in such a way that it wasn't a restriction per se, but that the committee as a whole was highly encouraging them to think carefully before they would use the funds, and be good to maintain some too.
That's a good suggestion. How do committee members feel about that wording, that change? Does that help, Chris, address what you were just saying in terms of the spirit of it?
I think that's really important to have what Chris said part of the language of our recommendation so that it's not lost.
Yeah.
The intent of the fund, right, is to
Want it to grow.
Yeah, be judicious with its expenditures.
How about this? That the funds be allowed to grow, and that, how do we just say that? Expenditures carefully, sorry. How about ideally funds are maintained? Or do we start with 5 or do we get rid of it? What do we think? And just leave it as what Chris said.
Yeah, I think the discussion, yeah, move towards removing it completely.
How about funds are not depleted in any one year. That may not be necessary. Let's see. Encourage funds to be allowed to grow over time. Carefully considered. Any wordsmithing on that? I know that's kind of off the cuff. Phil, Frank, Chris. Frank, go ahead. We haven't heard from you yet today.
I was just going to add, and you've already done it, just have a nice little paragraph there that, or blurb that expresses the intent rather than getting too specific. Because it is arbitrary. I mean, what's 10 years? Why didn't we say 7.4 years or 16.1 years? So it's arbitrary. And same with the 50%. So keep our intent expressed, and trust that the council does the right thing. And I think they will.
Chris, did you want to add something or tweak what I wrote? No? Okay. Anyone else? Joe?
Yeah, not on that provision, I'm fine with it, but I'm just looking at this one before, including any accrued interest. I'm just harking back, I'm involved in a major Superfund site in California, where it's about $800 million to clean up this site. And we settled one party for $85 million. And the question is, what do we do with the funds? And a lot of people are saying, well, we want the money to be there and we don't want to jeopardize that. But we then retain a investment advisor who laid out her plan for investing these funds. And I know we are now in a different situation currently, but that fund has grown well as a result of her conservative investments. So I just wonder whether it says not including any accrued interest. I would just wonder if we could put, instead of interest, any accrued income, so that if someone, Andrew Williams, for example, he's an investment advisor, is my understanding. And so that would just give a little bit of flexibility if somebody decided that it would be best to invest some of these funds, particularly if you're talking about 10 years.
Well, they will be invested. The idea absolutely is to invest them, and that's what the accrued interest is referring to.
I would say it's accrued income.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer.
Okay. We'll do that. Right. I think we were trying to say that the 500,000 was revenue that was generated directly from revenue sources, right?
Yeah, I understand the point, yes.
But, okay. But if that works, then.
That's fine for me.
Okay, good. Any other comments on this slide? Let's see any, Chris, your hand is still up. I just want to make sure that I'm not ignoring you.
Sorry about that. Put it down.
No worries. Okay, so that brings us back to,
So,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, for the third slide.
There we go.
Third slide.
Oh, jeez.
And you do have there, it could also include matching funds for future grant programs. Yeah, I would just verifying that was on there.
Verifying it. Yep, absolutely. Okay. Any other comments on this slide? Any other comments? So this is the potential sources of revenue slide. Any discussion on here? Or is everyone good with where we're at? Going once. Going twice. Okay.
I don't want to
Okay.
poke the bear, but I thought this would be the biggest point of discussion for the committee.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah. I think you're
All right.
absolutely right.
Okay, well, I mean, if, are there any other comments on the 4 slides that we took? Does anyone, Frank? And then
With
Marta.
regard to the fees or tax increases or however we generate this, can we kind of refresh my memory about how much per household we'd be talking about? For some reason, I was using 500,000 divided by 3,000, but I don't know if that's an accurate number.
I think it was 3,500 that we were
Yeah,
dividing it
it
by.
was.
So
About
it's
140,
150.
About 140.
$43.
Yep.
It's about $12, $15 a month.
Marta?
To the initial question about this slide, I guess to me, it might make sense to leave all of those as options, even the minimal revenue generation, because it might spread the source of funding over more possibilities. I don't know.
I think from the planning team's perspective, I think we agree with you. Again, it's multiple sources. The broader we allow this before it goes to, as it goes to council and the public, then the better really for it.
And who knows, there might be large annexations with new multi-unit developments that do generate some of those final 2 bullet point revenue.
Right? Frank, you put your hand back up.
Are there any other sources that should be considered that we don't see on this list?
These are the common ones. We did, the planning team did do a fair amount of research. We did remove transfer fees, real estate transfer fees, because they allocate from one existing fund. You don't get an increase. Those are fixed, and so they're already accounted for, so that it would be a reallocation. So that was removed. And then there was bonds, if I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Correct.
And
Yes.
that's not necessary. You don't borrow money to that's not what you do with your bonds, right? So, so these were the most common that we could identify.
Jim?
Yeah, just real quick, and this might not make the cut, but what about mentioning anything regarding, because it's not consistent funding, but regarding grant opportunities for the fund itself from county council members? They have a source of grant funds that they divvy out each year, and also state representatives do as well. Again, not a large amount of funding, and not on a consistent basis, but is that something we put down or not?
I mean, I'll just say with that, you could try. I think you would be unsuccessful. Grants are given for specific projects.
Right.
If you're just putting it into a fund without any idea about how you're going to use it, what they will say to you is, come back when you have money in the fund and
Right.
use it to match our grants. That's probably what they would say.
Mm-hmm.
But you could ask.
I agree with you,
Tina?
Phil.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
On that line of thinking, we could just simply indicate that grant opportunities should be considered, because it might be that out of this, there is a project that they want to move forward, and they can certainly, explore that opportunity. The other question I had was, as we think about, well, let me come back to that, because I've lost my train of thought to articulate it as well as I was thinking a minute ago. So I'll come back to it.
Okay. Jim, your hand is still up or up again? It's hard to tell. Sorry. Nope. Okay. Very good. Anyone else?
I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Well, we say a property tax increase, and I just wonder whether, we're going to have a reassessment, and based on my understanding of what may occur, that's likely to lead to increased property taxes on these properties, which thankfully have increased. And I just wonder whether we want to use the word increase or property tax funds, because it may be that we wouldn't need an increase, that some of the money that could be garnered from any additional funds generated by a reassessment could be used without increasing further residents' property taxes. Just a small point, but I'm just looking at it. You got a flat fee, and then we have a property tax increase. It seems to me it's more of a case of revenues rather than increase. That's just my thinking. I'm not heavy. Yeah.
Perhaps say property tax allocation.
Yeah, could be that. Yeah, that'd be a good
Something like
way of
that.
expressing it.
This is an important point where we need Anne Marie to chime in. Unfortunately, she's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could say
Because who
allocation
knows?
or.
Right, this might be one of those zero-sum situations where allocating to this fund means you're necessarily removing it from somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yes, there will be a reassessment, and yes, your property taxes will be different. But are they already spoken for? That I don't know the details on. I don't know if anybody does.
Right, like, is it zero sum for the city so that number doesn't change for the city, right? It's neutral, revenue neutral.
There's also a sensitivity on the
This would
part.
capture it. It's either an allocation or increase. It just tones it down a little bit.
Keena, you had your hand up, or Bill?
Okay, see if I can get it right this time. When I was thinking about who benefits from the town being resilient, and of course the residents do, but I also think about our visitors and tourists to the area. Those that are staying here, would pay through their accommodations tax. My question is, where does the parking funds go, and is there any opportunity to have some of that allocated, perhaps, from the, like the beach areas? Here's my case in point. Let's suppose there was some problems in the future, and they decided to build a dune along the front of the beach of Public Beach number 1. I forget what we're calling them now. And perhaps they wanted to use funds for that, because it is an important aspect of our local economy, is to have these visitors coming to the area. Are we tapping into that source in any way? Can anybody shed any light on it?
The parking fees go into the general fund at this point, and so they wouldn't be subject to that allocation. As they continue to grow, there's possible that it could be considered, but they wouldn't, they're not currently used in any way like that. So that doesn't hold right now. But I suppose it could be, but that would have to be a city council decision. Right now, all the parking fees go right into the general fund, and our general fund is pretty much tapped out. We're not building a huge reserve. We don't have excess usually at the end of the year.
Right. So in a sense, it's the same as the property tax transfer fee that we decided was a reallocation.
Yeah. And the other point is that there also, I had occasion to speak to a group this weekend, and because there was a question raised about what this committee was doing, I mentioned that the two items that the committee was considering, and the pushback I got from at least one person in the room was, please, if you're going to do anything, please be sensitive to the facts that the Board of Public Works just raised all of their fees.
Phil? You have-
Yeah, so, but Keena identifies another potential source of revenue.
Of course,
for this fund.
yep.
So increasing the parking fees with the marginal increase going to this fund.
It's possible. We did, as most everyone on this call realizes, we did increase the parking for the first time in 4 years at the beach this year from $2 to $2.50 an hour. It's conceivable that some portion of that could be allocated.
Okay. Chris?
We're going to use allocation also there.
Sure. I thought about that too. Chris, go ahead.
I've read actually a couple different places have done this, and I think Jim may have mentioned this a long ways back, but maybe for potentially as seed money for the fund, town surplus or reserves, and it might be more symbolic than anything else, just to show that the town's serious about this, but something to start it off with a balance, not rather than starting from zero, but having some seed money from the town that says, hey, look, we're doing this, yeah, and we are, raising something here, whether it's all these things or just some of these fees or taxes. But in addition to that, the town will be starting the fund with a balance of X. We could let the town decide that. But I guess for, purposes of this slide, I was thinking maybe just saying seed money to start the fund from the town.
And there's precedent for that.
Right.
Bethany Beach used fees from waterfront development. The big hotel, the redevelopment of that hotel to seed their resiliency fund. So you got any big projects down there underway? You can do the same thing. Got any beachfront hotels going up?
No, we do not. Nothing in the city limits. And, the accommodations tax is 8% for the city, that goes to the state. And council recently did a change that would enable us to charge an accommodations tax by the city. It hasn't been adopted yet. But our gross rental receipts tax is 5%, and right now that's being looked at in terms of whether that should apply evenly to short-term and long-term rentals. So that will be another topic coming up that will impact the use of accommodations fees. Anne Marie has just sent a note that she has no voice, but she could type some information in the chat. So. If you wish to, she will, if Anne Marie, if you wish to put something in, please do.
Okay. Are there any other comments or changes to the slides? I can't see the chat with the share, so I need to stop sharing.
Can you see it?
She does put something in there.
Janelle's looking at it, and she's nothing yet, so.
Okay. Okay. Is the committee ready to vote, to make a motion to vote on the Resiliency Fund? Any reason we shouldn't move in to make that? I didn't see any. Okay.
Jen, can you state
Yep.
exactly what the motion would be?
Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, here comes Anne Marie.
Oh.
If that's her voice, we're in trouble.
I'm sorry.
You can't even say you sound hoarse.
No, she sounds dog tonight.
Does. And then, Janelle, I think Jim Baker's back in the attendees list. I think he had to change phones or something. If we could promote him back for the vote. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm actually in a bad reception area, so I might lose you.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we.
But I agree with what was on the screen in case I lose you.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. All right. So, Anne Marie, did you have anything you wanted to add? I don't want to think like it. Okay. There we go.
There we go.
So Anne Marie says in the chat that parking fees are already budgeted in the general fund. So if that's her recommendation for our slide, then would be to remove allocation.
Okay. All right.
That if you want to fund the fund with parking fees, then you should do so with an increase in the fee, with
Right.
that marginal increase going specifically to this fund.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay.
Is Anne Marie's recommendation.
Is the committee okay with that recommendation? We'll just, so it'll say parking fee increase. And that's it. Okay.
I would just point out that would be sensitive this year because we just increased them by 25%.
Right. Okay, and then Anne Marie also said that the state is always threatening to limit our short-term rental tax, so if we want to use that, we would need to move on it sooner rather than later.
Right.
Okay. Great. Okay. Janelle, do you want me to read the motion or a motion, or do you? Something?
You can do it, unless you want me to read your PowerPoint presentation, and I can read it rather quickly.
Yeah, let me do that. Okay. Okay. All right, can everybody see? Screen again? Yep, okay. So the committee would make a motion to council to consider exploring and establishing an emergency relief policy that addresses funding for storm recovery efforts under the city's purview, roads, operations, etc., but not including beach replenishment, is part one of the motion. Part two would be in terms of recommending a resiliency fund. The fund would collect funds for a minimum of 25 years for the purpose of funding future projects and improvements that will help the city become more resilient to climate impacts. The goal is to build a minimum of $500,000 per year, not including any accrued income. We encourage the funds be allowed to grow over time and that expenditures be carefully considered. Ideally, funds are not depleted in any one given year. Intended projects are those actions that will make the city more resilient to climate impacts. Such projects could include green infrastructure, acquisition of open space, individual and bulk property buyouts, and vulnerability assessments. It can also include matching funds for future grants and programs from state and federal governments. Funds will not be used for beach replenishment. Accessing these funds shall require approval from a supermajority of town council, defined as at least 4 of the 5 members. Revenue should come from multiple sources. These sources could include creating a city-collected resiliency fund, which is comprised of a flat fee for residential property and for non-residential property based on square footage of impervious surface per lot. The square footage includes the ground floor of the building plus those surfaces defined as impervious by the city, does not include square footage of the building other than the ground floor. It would also include accommodations fee, short-term rental and lodging, property tax allocation or increases, building permit fee increase, developer impact fee, parking fee increase, or seed money from the city. With that, do I hear a motion? Marta, is your hand raised for a question or for the motion? Question? Go ahead. You're muted.
I just noticed that it said short-term rental for the first time, and were we purposely not including long-term rentals in that?
The city currently does not look at long-term rentals any differently than short-term rentals.
It's all
okay.
right, it's all one,
Fine.
it's all 5%
And then on-
right now.
And then on slide 3, do we need individual or bulk? Just leave it property buyouts, or is it helpful to specify both?
Probably helpful to specify both because a lot of people don't think of bulk property buyouts off the top of their heads.
Yeah.
Thinking about it. Okay. Okay. So with that, is there a motion? Somebody want to make that first? Jim? Okay. Do I hear a second or see a second? Frank? Okay. I'm going to do it verbally. We do a roll call. So Candace?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Chris Cooley?
Aye.
Marta?
Aye.
Rodney?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Keena?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
And Jim made the thing. And Khalil abstains, I believe. All right. So,
Just so
And
everyone
Jim?
knows, I'm abstaining because of our city's code of ethics and particularly our bias section there. So I don't think it's appropriate that I actually take a position.
and Jim Baker?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So that the ayes have it with 9. Any opposed? Nobody left. So with that, we have passed the recommendation for the Resiliency Fund. Congratulations, everyone.
Yay.
Okay, and so with that, again, congratulations. And I think that, Mayor, I'll pass it back over to you. The committee has done some good work over these last few months.
You're absolutely summed it up correctly. First of all, I want to thank all the committee members for all the time and energy that you've put into working on this project. And it certainly reflects a tremendous amount of effort on your part and a very thoughtful consideration. I want to thank Jen and Phil and all the members of the team that have come together to put this, to work this out, for not only the background information that was provided, but for the work that was put together to formulate the 14 items that were identified initially and distilling those down to the 2 that you worked on. I think it's important to note that the other 12 items will not be lost, that council will have the benefit of seeing those other items that you've identified. And at some point, perhaps in the not too distant future, some of those items may be picked up by council and looked at further. But we will be taking the 2 items that you have identified and you've worked hard to develop resolutions for to council for consideration. I would hope that we could do that perhaps in the May meeting, but certainly not later than June. So I think this is, as we've talked about several times, this is a recommendation for council to consider. And undoubtedly, there will be considerable discussion at the council level, and we would undoubtedly have a public hearing before we adopted any action that would go into effect. So again, I thank every one of you for, first of all, participating and your willingness to participate. You've brought a broad cross-section of the community to this to the table here, and I really think it has been a great opportunity for to benefit the entire community that you represented such a cross-section of the population. And I just can't thank both the University of Delaware IPA program and DENREX enough for the efforts that they put into providing the background information and structuring this program as we've moved forward. So thank you all very much.
Thank you all. So, well, with that, it has been a pleasure working with you all over the past few months, and really appreciated all of your input. But with that, I think we adjourn our last meeting of the committee.
I think that's true. But again, Jen and Phil, thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank
You're very
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yep.
And it was nice meeting everybody, so to speak.
Yeah, sorry we never really all got together. But hopefully, as we bring this forward to City Council for consideration, you will stay active and remain active in the discussions as we go forward. You've done your work, and now it'll be interesting to see how Council considers this and what action they want to take based upon your recommendations. Okay, thanks.
Time will tell.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you.